Hello, everybody, and welcome to DnDTime Talks, a show where Pete and myself discuss all things Dungeons and or Dragons. Tonight we have a really exciting topic to go over, as we're going to be taking a look behind the curtains. We're going to be talking about improvisation, namely as a dungeon master, about how not to kill your players, basically how to run combat to help to frame and build your dramatic conclusions. But before we dive into any of that, let's just take a brief moment to introduce ourselves. I am Dungeon Master Jeremy, DnDTime Jeremy, aka Trust a Flump, as can be seen by my little name tag above my head. And I am joined, as always, by Pete
Hello.
of the Soothing Voice.
Hello. As you may have noticed by now, my voice, for any of you tuned into Worlds yesterday, is not in the greatest of shape. So Jeremy may be doing some of the load bearing for today's conversation.
The forgotten one with the tier 2 subscription. I didn't know we had tiered subscription. The forgotten one, thank you for your support. We appreciate that. It is, in fact, that time again.
But despite that, no amount of coarseness in my voice could ever prevent me from saying hello to The Forgotten One, Bionic Shiva, Opal Dragon, Xandaril, Ryguy Big Boy, Farfel 13, and thank you very much, and Wyvern Soul, and thank you very much, The Forgotten One.
And Xandaril, I think you forgot to mention, and Tangerine Parasol.
Tangerine Parasol.
Pete,
I did
you
say
ignorant
Xandaril.
baboon,
And
you forgot.
Oh dear. And Demon Lord Nemi, hello again.
Hey, Nemi, it's been a while. And of course we got Flannel Pug. Flannel, you're awake. Welcome to the world of the living. But yeah, everyone, welcome again as always. Oh god, Sword's here too.
And Sword, there's so many people.
Thank you all for stopping by, for hanging out tonight. We got actually a really exciting topic. Pete and I are we really like this topic. It's just I think it's a really cool one. But yeah, let's go into it a little. Oh, we got one uphill one here.
Hello.
Basically, over the next hour or so, Pete and I are gonna kind of part the curtain and show you guys what it's really like to run combat, especially over a long-term campaign, and how we mess around with things kind of behind the scenes. So this is definitely a dungeon master oriented discussion. If you're
100%.
a player and you don't want the illusion of Dungeons and Dragons spoiled for you, this might not be the one for you. I hate to tell someone that you might not want to watch, but if you're that kind of person, maybe you don't want to watch. But if you're ever interested in running a game, in dungeon mastering, and in learning the more kind of the finesse, the touch to running and creating dramatic builds and combat for your games, I think this is kind of where you want to be. We got the news for you.
I'm very excited about this talk, and so yeah, I want to just hop right into it, Jeremy. I see
Flannel Pug, you killed a player today with an ooze.
Oh, congratulations! How did it feel? Were you sad, or were you secretly very proud of yourself for defeating your characters? It's always emotional. I was gonna say, so Max Meister had a funny comment, which is how not to kill your players. Don't rage and say rocks fall, you all die. The end.
That is number one, correct. Yep.
And also I see Maddie out there, but that is a very good starting piece of advice to go off of. Don't do that. But it's a little bit it's pretty intricate, a lot of the stuff that you can kind of get away with behind the scenes. So yeah, that's going to be today's topic. It's going to be very improvisational on how to improvise in combat and to change things up to make them exciting. And this may be the start of a series on improvisation and how to kind of just run games on the fly. We might do one for exploration and also for role play, or maybe we'll combine those into one, because I think they have a little bit more overlap than necessarily combat does. But yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, we're talking about this topic first of all because I think it's probably the most valuable topic, most valuable skill for completely new dungeon masters to have.
Yeah.
When you first start playing, you don't know how strong monsters are. You don't know what's an appropriate threat for your party, and nothing feels worse than like, I walk into the cave. All right, an ancient dragon kills you all. Wait, what? We didn't roll for initiative yet. It just feels real bad. when you totally misjudge things. And this hopefully will give you a little. I mean, that situation I don't think you can solve, but hopefully this will give you some more another tool for your DM arsenal to help you out.
Farfel, the answer is no one does. Only the dice know exactly how strong a monster is.
That's true. That's totally true. So really, it's not just new DMs. It's everyone. Yeah. Everyone needs to know this if you're DMing ever, or might ever DM.
I have only the faintest idea through tons of experience on how much a monster I pick is going to threaten my party, and I'm still completely baffled a lot of the time about how the monsters I pick end up matching up. There was a few things I wanted to address before we start getting into the actual improvisation stuff, a few kind of like baselines to start out. And these are some of the tools that I think you should have if you're going to start really kind of playing around with stuff. And that is one, if you're going to be improvising random encounters, you want to have the monster manual. That is going to be the most valuable tool in your DM's toolkit, far more so than the Dungeon Master's Guide. You're going to want to have a monster manual because it's just going to have tons of information that you can pull and use and put into your games and modify for your own purposes in your head on the fly, which we'll talk about how to do. But that's important. Also, I believe that you should have a player's handbook. Odds are, if you're DMing, you probably already had one. But I think it's another good idea to have a player's handbook and be ready to have all of your kind of spell options available. And then I think a slightly more abstract tool, which is probably the most important of the three, is to just have just a solid understanding of how combat works and how the game works. And I think it's true in all things. Like, it's certainly true in music. They say about jazz, if you're going to improvise and break the rules, you need to understand them very thoroughly first. And that's not quite as true in Dungeons and Dragons, but it's certainly helpful to have a very firm baseline understanding of the rules in order to start playing around with them and kind of using those rules to your advantage to create, dramatic and interesting encounters.
I completely agree there. In order to bend and break and change the rules behind the scenes so that things appear to be flowing exactly as they should be, you need to understand how the rules work. So if you don't know the rules, just open up to, I think it's chapter 7 in the Player's Handbook, Combat. Just give it a read through. It's like 3 pages. It's really
very worth reading.
Not a lot to just get a base understanding for how the flow of combat is supposed to work. Pretty straightforward. So I guess the next question, right, is why would you want to do this? And the answer is to make things fun, to make a fun encounter. There are a lot of elements we're kind of going to brush on throughout this discussion, but really we're going to talk about difficulty, the stakes, and the story as like the big 3. And then we're going to talk a little bit about environments and tactics and kind of the mechanics of combat as well. So we'll start with, I'm a little out of order here, but I want to talk about story first. The big,
good choice.
Whenever you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, whether you're playing a very murder hobo we're exploring and just going throughout the world and doing stuff and killing monsters and getting loot, or if you're playing a more dramatic game with a longer story arc where the players are investigating the corruption of blah, 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 and discovering the M. Night Shyamalan plot twist, and then defeating the big bad evil guy at the end, right? The big thing you want to build is drama and tension, meaning you're going to want fights leading up to the big fight, the big dramatic finale, to be less challenging and, more manageable for your players. And you want the big dramatic end fight, the finale, to feel like a dramatic end fight. You want to build that tension, that drama, and that whole storytelling through your combats, and through your storytelling too. But your combats want to follow that, right? If players are fighting the lieutenant to the big bad evil guy, and they all get TPK'd the fight before they fight the big bad evil guy, well, shit, it still is dramatic, but that's not, you don't get to fight the big bad. Even if the big bad would have killed you, that's way better than having the big bad second in command kill you. because it just has that dramatic
You weren't
tension.
even worthy to face the final foe. It just doesn't feel as right.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good, right? It feels bad. Losing to the big bad also feels bad, but it feels less bad. So let's talk a little bit about that difficulty, because that's what we're mentioning right now.
Actually, if I could say a couple more things on story that I wanted to talk about as well.
Yeah.
Because I think there's also an idea that's kind of that's kind of prevalent throughout the community, which is, and I see it a lot, is that when combat starts, that storytelling sort of stops and takes a back seat to see what the outcome of the combat is, and then it resumes after the combat is over. But there's a lot of really cool storytelling that you can do in the context of combat. You can have people make, you can have your NPCs and the things that you're doing in the world be really interesting and still engaging just through their actions. Having, a lieutenant of a very powerful and evil army, sacrificing his soldiers in fights and sending them to positions where they're going to die for tactical advantage. Having a character that's very timid around certain types of attacks, because you can see that he has, like, maybe when the players hold up their torch, he has burn marks that they've seen on his body, and he reacts and avoids those peoples because he's afraid of fire. You can also do a lot of storytelling in just the way that you decide to control and have your NPCs act in combat, which I think is something that's often overlooked and can really add a lot to any combat encounter. That stuff's also, I think, pretty easy to just decide on the fly.
And yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, about how you can actually use those storytelling elements as tools to help negotiate the combat later on. So first thing we're going to talk about is difficulty. It's one of the trickiest things to kind of get down to master. We say master. You can't master creating difficult combats, creating appropriately difficult combats. You just can't do it. Every single party is going to be totally different. Some parties will just be totally different depending on, what number adventure, like if this is their third combat in the day versus their first, or I prepared city, investigation spells today instead of combat spells.
Today I just unlocked Force Cage, so now that's a factor.
Things change from day to day to day. I mean, just yesterday I was running a game and I had a combat where the players came across a giant crocodile, which is actually a pretty scary enemy. And that crocodile nearly one-shot a character, maimed another one. The second we went into the second round of initiative, and the bard cast Levitate, and the giant crocodile floated into the air, and the combat was over. Yep, I mean, pretty straightforward.
It's a classic.
And like, there's stuff I could have done to fiddle with that, to adjust how that was working on the fly. But how challenging a combat is can really vary pretty substantially.
And
but
I think the main good thing in a lot of cases, like that combat that you described, that was probably really cool for that bard when he completely just took out that crocodile with an interesting use of a spell, or I guess not even that crazy and unique. I apologize. I should have been using they. When she picked up the crocodile and used what is actually kind of like the basic use of the spell, but that feels awesome because that's like the best case scenario. And it's also important, like, just as it's good to have these dramatic encounters where everything comes down to the wire and with the final strike of the player, when the whole party's down and the big bad is killed with the final critical hit by the one surviving player. It's also good to just have encounters where the players wipe the floor with their enemies and get to show off how powerful they are.
Exactly. Rarely do you want a random encounter to just kill a bunch of players. Now, a random encounter can kill players. There's nothing wrong with that. But you really want to consider it, especially if the players are building towards something dramatic. Now, if you're playing just that murder hobo-y style game we talked about earlier that doesn't have a lot of stakes or story, absolutely. You can have a random encounter be deadly. That's totally fine, totally reasonable. But if you're trying to build toward a dramatic conclusion, if your players are going through the Underdark to find the Durgar King's hold and defeat him there, you don't want a random encounter of like, oh yes, an Umber Hulk shows up to TPK or kill half the party. Because It's like, oh, well, we can't even defeat the natural fauna here. There's literally no way we'd be able to kill the Dwarf King. Where, that's just, you gotta think about it in that kind of context. But anyway, there should be fights, like Pete said, that are brutal, and there should be fights that are pretty straightforward. And the next kind of argument we need to think of is, well, also, what are the stakes of the fight, right? Random encounter, there are no stakes. The players don't really get anything if they win. You can roll randomly for loot, but like, why does this Umber Hulk have 300 gold pieces? Right.
I love it. Just when one of these days, I've always wanted to do this. I really want to put just like a whole chest inside of a monster. Just be like, yeah, they must have eaten it at some point. I do that
all the time. It's fun.
I've never have. It's gonna be one of these days. I'm very stingy with my loot.
And so yeah, the stakes are really important, and the stakes should be clear. Like people were saying, oh, the monster must have eaten a chest. Yeah, you find it when you cut him open. That wasn't obvious during the fight, right? So the players didn't know that was kind of a stake. Now you might describe a treasure chest-sized bump in his stomach, but in the ogre's belly. But I guess having the stakes be clear and important is very relevant to how challenging the combat should. A random encounter where they run into, like, I'm going to go back to the Umber Hulk, right? Shouldn't be as dangerous as the random encounter, or as the, trying to assassinating the guards, sneaking into the Dwarf King's or the Durgar King's hold, because there are stakes for that fight with the guards. There's tension, there's drama to it. If we don't defeat them quickly, they'll sound the alarm.
Yeah, that's right? A great one.
That's a huge option. Or when they're fighting the Durgar King himself, we have to defeat this guy quickly because his reinforcements will show up. His garrison will arrive, and then we'll be ambushed and we'll be flanked, and there's no chance, right? There's drama, there's tension, there's stakes.
And situations where there's low stakes, those can also be interesting as well. Let's say that there is a creature that's guarding kind of a big door that you have to get around, and it's just kind of like, this big dumb ogre that is standing in front of a massive door that you have to get through. There's not really a lot at stake here. It's just you have to battle the ogre or not die, which isn't that exciting a stake. But without any real stakes and no real need to kill the ogre, now the players are going to start thinking, well, do we even have to do that? Maybe we can just get through the door. And now, when you're creating situations that have these different ways of approaching them, that starts to really engage players, and they get excited, and they start to feel like they're really getting to play. It's when there's choices. A lot of the times, that's when, that's like the most fun thing to do, at least for me as a player.
Yep, exactly. So right now, so far, whenever you're doing a combat, whether it be a random encounter or a planned battle leading up to some conclusion, think of those two things. How difficult do you want it to be? And what are the stakes of this combat? It could be a really difficult combat with really low stakes, which encourages players to be creative and find ways around it. And that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it is clear, right? The troll that guards the bridge over the endless chasm. There is now the really hard combat. Say your player is a level 1 and it's a troll. That gives the players some creative, some incentive, right, to try and find a way around it. It's gonna be real hard to fight this troll, and we just want to get across it's just a chasm. Like, maybe we can knock over a tree and make a bridge. It gives them this opportunity, this incentive to think about it a little, and that helps to build a cool story.
Yeah.
The next kind of thing sorry, Pete, did you have more to say in there?
I was just going to talk about environment.
I was going to say, yeah, let's talk about knocking over a tree to get over the chasm.
Yeah, it seemed perfect. A perfect segue.
I know, right? It's almost like I planned it. I didn't.
I don't.
It's almost.
I know that you didn't. But it worked out very nicely. So let's talk a little bit about the environment of a battle. That's another way to really make any particular encounter dynamic, is by giving the players something to interact with around them. That can be extremely simple. But having them, basically the only thing that I would recommend not doing, unless that is the actual feature and feel that you're going for, like, say an arena, is just having a flat space with nothing to interact with, in which the players just are slogging it out with something. unless that is exactly the field that you want. Other than that, I would recommend putting some kind of thing in the environment for them to interact with. So this bridge, or trees in a forest, things to hide behind, ways to start thinking about the things around them. It could be simple. It could be simple as the grass in the open plane that they're standing in is very high, so players can kind of duck into it and move around amongst it. Or maybe amongst the grass in the big open plane, there's just a big giant rock right there in the middle. And I guarantee you're going to have players that use that rock for everything that it's worth, climbing on top of it to do a jump attack, going around it to take cover. I always am a firm believer, and this was a thing that it took me a little while to learn, I think, but I've now become a staunch believer and always put something in every encounter for the players to interact with.
And one of the best parts, right? If you say you're in a forest, right? Let's say that's the situation you put out to your players, and they run into like a rabid giant elk, and now they're battling the rabid giant elk. The only situation you've put forward is you're in a forest, and what your idea of a forest is might be different from.
We lost you there.
Am I still here? Hello, Pete. You're frozen on the webcam. Can you hear me, bud?
I can hear you now. I don't know if the issue is me or you.
I think the issue might have been you. I'll refresh that anyway. Hopefully we can get your webcam back on. Oh, looks like you're back.
Oh, so I just
chat can hear me just fine. Pete, it was you. You blepped a little.
My bad. I'm gonna. Well, I guess everything's fine now. If it happens again, I'll relog.
So in the situation, right, of that forest, what I think a forest might be different than what Pete thinks a forest might be. I assume there are trees. I assume there are small rocks. There's foliage. Maybe there's bushes to hide behind. And Pete might just think, all right, there are some trees. That's it. I might think, oh, they're pine trees, so they're easy to, maybe they're hard to climb, but there's a lot of cover with them. Pete might think, oh, well, they're just oak trees because that's what Pete thinks of with a forest. So there's very little cover. You can hide behind the tree mostly, but that's about it. And there's such a wild difference, right, between those two scenarios. So a great thing to ask or to say as a dungeon master, and I try to do this as often as possible, rather, is when you say you're in a forest, and it's a very simple, straightforward option like that, you can make sure to just tell your players, I'm not going into a ton of description here, but this is a forest. Most of the things that you think you might be able to find in a forest are probably here. If you have any questions, ask. Ask me, are there any beehives nearby? And as a dungeon master, you didn't think about beehives, and that's okay. Because you can just decide, maybe there are beehives. Maybe as a dungeon master, you decide, yeah, there definitely are. You can just say that there are because the players have a cool idea about beehives, or maybe you want to just say, I'll roll a die. I'll roll a d6. On a 4 through 6, there's a beehive. On a 1 through 3, there's not. And you can leave it up to dice. You can just decide arbitrarily. Both of those are perfectly fine. But the key there is tell your players, if you're interested, if there's anything in the terrain, ask, and I'll tell you. Because you can't be expected to cover everything in Theater of the Mind, especially for a more random encounter.
Yeah, it is near impossible. Well, it's not near impossible. It's impossible to think of every scenario that your players will happen to think of in their own brains.
Precisely. So yeah, that's environments, tactics. Try and keep those in there. It's just going to make combat more fun, and it gives you as a DM a lot to play with.
And the last thing, I don't think it's worth spending too much time on, but I think it's important, and that is the mechanics of the battle. And the only thing I really wanted to say about that was that you should vary those up. Don't always attack your players with the same type of thing. If everything that comes after them just challenges them by, trying to beat their armor class with attacks, that's going to get boring and kind of stale, and also make people who have skills that aren't necessarily high armor kind of feel bad over time because their particular abilities aren't being tested. So make sure you're hitting players with a variety of challenges, things like grapples, things that require saving throws, maybe on some rare occasions, effects that automatically hit, like say a magic missile spell or something along those lines. So that's pretty much all I think I wanted to say about mechanics. I don't know if there's much else that we need to talk about there, because that's fairly straightforward. And thank you very much. I'm going to say the name wrong. I'm going to try it. Hi Heitzel. Heitzel. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we super appreciate your support. And he says, "Hi, I'm a new DM starting campaign tomorrow. Whoop, whoop. And I think what you're doing is awesome for new DMs. Thanks for informing us about everything. Happy DMing." Thank you. I hope that what we say is helpful for you.
I agree.
It's helpful for us to just go over it.
Yeah, I learn a lot from writing up like notes and stuff for these talks.
So, I guess our next kind of direction we're going here. And just one last thing on mechanics before that. Even if you just have enemies that just attack armor class, you can have different types of enemies. The big troll is going to hit whatever's in front of the big troll, whereas a bandit might be smart and might go for the cleric standing in the back hiding, right? Or the wizard standing in the back hiding. Different monsters
play
and
around
different
with range and things like that.
Yeah, different enemies and different types of monsters will fight in different ways. And so when you look at the creature, look at its intelligence score, and that can help to inform you how optimally, you could say, the creature is going to fight. If it's going to know who to attack versus who to ignore. Obviously, the barbarian who's raging, who's got a ton of health, and is right up in the front, that's not the optimal thing for this ogre to attack. But the ogre's going to attack it because it's dumb. Whereas the bandits might be smarter than that. So that's just another way to kind of consider. Yeah,
I also love using that particular metric in order to specifically looking at the intelligence modifier. I do that too.
So let's think of let's jump over to our next kind of situation here, really getting into the nitty gritty of it. How to vary encounters on the fly, because that's what really is the most important thing we're doing here.
We really wanted to talk about today.
And there are a ton of ways to do this, right? There are rules as written, legal ways, and there are fudging the rolls. Most of the time, you don't want to fudge the rolls. If you can help it, you can do it. There's nothing wrong with fudging the rolls if you think you need to fudge rolls. But there are so many other legal, not legal, bad words,
more
so
effective.
Many other correct ways to do that, to manipulate difficulty on the fly without having to roll behind the screen and say, "Oh, he missed you," when he rolled a natural 20. And there's a lot of cool drama to that. So honestly, I know we just ended with mechanics, but let's kind of tie in a few of the different things that we've just talked about together. I'm going to talk about an example Pete mentioned earlier, mechanics and story. Pete mentioned a character with horrible burn scars, right? You're talking about your story in combat, your character with awful burn scars. Maybe he's they are a bandit with awful burn scars that they've covered with they're wearing bandanas around their face, so maybe you don't see the burn scars. And they're fighting the players, and the players are battling. And the bandits are trashing the players, and you're like, oh my god, these bandits were supposed to be a walk in the park, but 3 of them crit when they shot their crossbows at the wizard, and the wizard's dying.
We've all been there.
Oh no. And how do you fix it? Well, a great way to do that, right, is introduce this character with burn scars. Say, all right, as they're running around, one of their bandanas gets loose, revealing terrible burn scars on his face. And your players think, oh, he's got burn scars. Maybe he doesn't like fire. Right? They draw this conclusion, and the player says, I shoot him with a firebolt. And on the fly, you say, oh yeah, the firebolt seems to be super impactful. He freaks out. The bandit drops its weapon and tries to pat the fire out. And you've just added this extra effect that you look at the bandit stat block. It does not say, if hit with a firebolt, drops its weapon and spends its turn doing nothing.
Yes.
But you've just created this excellent storytelling tie-in where your player gets to be clever interacting with this descriptive element that you put into story. And
and you've now solved that exact issue that you were looking for.
You feel good. The players don't get aced by a bunch of random bandits, and everything's great.
Everybody wins.
Exactly. And I mean, another thing about varying encounters on the fly. So a lot of the times when you're talking about environment, when you're talking about, like I said earlier, it's okay to tell the players, hey man, if you think there's something that could exist here, ask him if it's there and I'll tell you. And the players come up with something like, oh, is there a chandelier in this foyer? Say they're battling in the entry foyer to the Giant King. right? And they're fighting the Giant King's soldiers. And they ask, "Oh, is there a chandelier?" Oh, well, yeah, of course there's a chandelier.
Just of
Oh,
course. What kind of
just
castle do you think this is?
as a dungeon master, you didn't even think about a freaking chandelier. But this player just created the chandelier, and it is now real. It is now part of the environment because they asked, and you said yes. And that gives the players an awesome new tool to murk some giants. I shoot the chandelier's chain with my crossbow. All right, it shatters and the chandelier falls, killing the giant instantly. Right? You've given them this tool to help manipulate the flow of combat.
And that is a very sort of classical improvisation tool, not just in D&D, but in improvisational acting and comedy. This idea of yes and is the term that is used to describe it, which is saying that when someone suggests an idea in the world, just say yes to it, and that makes for more engaging stories and continues narrative and keeps pushing things on. And then the and part of yes and is, and then add on to it. So like in that example that Jeremy was just talking about with this chandelier, you've said yes to the chandelier, and then maybe they wouldn't have thought of the chain, but you could just also add in, yeah, there's a chandelier up above. It's fairly large, and you look up at it, the chain that seems to be supporting it is rusted and worn. You can hear the chandelier kind of creaking as it slowly sways from the wind of the encounter below. And you can start to, create and nudge players by the way you describe the environment and working on their ideas into interesting storytelling directions.
Precisely. And these are all just awesome dramatic ways to kind of move the flair of the battle. Sometimes, however, you're in a situation where you can't do that, where maybe there isn't a nice enough environment, or you've already gone out of your way and kind of put yourself in a corner saying, yes, it is a plain, boring stone dungeon wall, and blah, blah, the players have tried tapping at the stone, and it's very solid, and okay, so I have nothing to play with the environment, and it's like a gelatinous cube that's fighting them. Oh no, I've got nothing I can fiddle with here. Like this gelatinous cube doesn't have burn scars. We know the room is safe. How do I deal with this? And there are some other awesome ways built in to Dungeons and Dragons to help you do that. So if you look at the gelatinous cube in the monster manual, you'll notice the gelatinous cube has a number of hit points. And it'll say it has 84 hit points. But it'll also have some other numbers next to it. It's hit dice, which are 8d10 plus 40. Oh, my cat. What that 8d10 plus 40 is that is a range of the maximum hit points that a gelatinous cube can have. It can have as little as 8d10s, so 8, and the minimum roll on a d10 is 1 plus 48. So it can have as low as 48 hit points.
Likewise, it can have as many as 120.
Precisely. And so that range is huge. It's an 80 hit point range. That's almost as much hit points as the average gelatinous cube has, because that is what the hit points it gives you is the average. So in that situation, you just decide, man, this gelatinous cube is a weak gelatinous cube. Just decided halfway through because, oh my god, half the party is dissolving in this gelatinous cube, and I did not want this to be a deadly encounter. It's supposed to be a random encounter while they were taking a long rest in this dungeon that they just entered. Oh god. Yeah, it's got 48 hit points. It's got the lowest possible hit points gelatinous cube can have. Cool. There's nothing wrong with what you just did. That is completely rules as written. And until you tell the players, this creature has 84 hit points, the creature does not have 84 hit points. This creature has some ambiguous number of hit points that you can determine completely on the fly.
And I think this is kind of the most important takeaway, I think, for people that I would really love if you learn nothing else from this talk. If nothing else sticks with you, it is that nothing at the table is set in stone until that you say out loud that it is. Every single aspect of the gelatinous cube can be to some degree or another, and any monster can be to some degree or another modified to fit your purposes behind the screen, and that is only true. That only becomes set in stone once you've said out loud what it is or shown the players through some other means. So This is a very important caveat to that, is once you have established something, you need to remain consistent with your rulings. For example, you can't have the gelatinous cube sometimes get hit with an attack of 8 and sometimes get hit with an attack armor class of 10, because that will kind of throw players off and they'll realize that things are changing and being manipulated behind the scenes. But once, until you establish it,
even that you can still add some drama to. Let's say in that same situation, you're up against that cube. Your players are level 1. They're having a rough time. They don't have any spells or anything. And you think, oh my God, they haven't done any damage to this, and 2 of them are already unconscious. Reducing that hit points to 48 still is not going to do it. How do I solve this? And the answer is, again, through that drama and story. So they're fighting the cube, and you really just don't want this cube to be a total party kill, because it just doesn't fit the narrative and the drama you're trying to build. Well, you can decide that this cube is different from a normal gelatinous cube. And it has a specific feature, which is when this gelatinous cube reaches half its maximum hit points, maybe it shrinks down in size and can no longer absorb players. Wow. That doesn't say that on the gelatinous cube character sheet. But that makes a ton of sense, right?
Yep.
It's got half its hit points missing, and you describe that in the narrative as you swing into the cube, chunks of gelatinous flesh flubble everywhere, and the cube begins to congeal and undulate and shrinks down, trying to reconsolidate itself, spewing forth your party members onto the ground. The cube is not yet defeated, however, your friends have been released for now.
I was actually thinking along a similar line, Jeremy, when you were talking about that low hit point cube and how to kind of alter things for the narrative. I was imagining a cube that once they're kind of slashing into it to describe that low hit point cube, maybe on the inside it's hollow, and that implies that there was recently, perhaps you can describe, maybe there's a human shaped hole in it. Someone who was absorbed by this cube and got out and took a lot of cube with them on the way. And now you're just introducing new story elements. You're making the players think about, in both of those examples, kind of why the cube kind of functions in the way it does, and they start, thinking about the logic of the world and seeing that it does in fact start to track, and that can just create some great stories.
Yeah, we have some great comments in chat about more ways to play with this, right? Bionic Shiba recommends having NPCs appear that the players may have heard of ambiguously or have met at some point in the past. Maybe they're going into the Underdark to find this lost dwarf veteran who was lost in a recent expedition, and they need to go find them. Dude, have the dwarf veteran show up and save their asses from the cube. And the dwarf's like, what are you all doing down here? I've been stuck down here for weeks. And right, you make this, it builds into the story, it ties in, and it works. Another comment by Game Master's Vault. You have to consider you have 3 to 8 players at your table, and each of them is trying to think about how to defeat your monster. And so maybe they're smarter than you give them credit for. And, that's absolutely true. Sometimes you just got to consider my players are smart. 8 people at the table is smarter than 1 dungeon master behind a screen. And so sometimes you don't need to do anything. But these are all kind of tools that are part of the tool set. If you have an NPC appear and save the party every time things look bad, man, that sucks. You start to feel like your players aren't the heroes, and that's not what players are. And contrary-wise, if you're if you have every single time they're fighting a monster, have it actually be a weaker version of the monster, that feels bad too. So it's really a matter of thinking. It looks like I lost Pete on Discord. Oh, Pete's back. Great.
Hello.
Welcome back.
My apologies. I'm seeming to having some connection issues tonight. Man, my voice is off. My internet's off.
But yeah, these are all tools in the tool set so that on the fly you can help to really make that drama happen.
You were talking about tools? That was the thing I wanted to say.
Well, before we jump too into that, one last situation. We talked about the cube. That's easy, right? Chunks of the cube fall off and it becomes weaker. Well, if you're fighting, let's say, a giant, right? We're going back to those giants in the Giant King Citadel. that giant, like, you don't just, yes, the giant's arm falls off. And I mean, you could do that, but like, that's a little bit of a stretch. And
that's the kind of
rewarding,
thing
like,
that maybe you could do on a critical hit.
exactly, rewarding a player crit, you could do something like that. But in the event, let's say your player doesn't crit and things are looking real bad and this giant's gonna kill them all. Well, man, giants and creatures like that aren't even monstrous creatures, right? Things that can think, have self-preservation. That creature might flee if it's reduced to half its hit points. Doesn't matter if half the party's down. That creature might not realize just how, okay, it might kill 3 more players before dying, but then it'll die. And the giant guard doesn't want to die. So you can just decide, well, he's been reduced to more than half his hit points. He flees. You can do that. That's totally fine. That's a tool in your tool set, especially if you're talking about intelligent creatures. And it might be a giant. It might be a wyvern, right? They're up on a mountain and a wyvern attacks them and it like murks half the party. But dude, that wyvern gets hit for half its health. It doesn't want to die. It flies away. Doesn't matter. It's not smart enough to think, well, I could kill the other 2 players over the next 2 turns.
You can also
it's
think
dumb, but it's smart enough that it wants to live. Sorry, go ahead, Pete.
I was going to say, you can also think about like the motivation of these kind of characters and why they're fighting. Maybe this wyvern is protecting some eggs that it has, some of its hatchlings, and the players can see as they're kind of getting ready to lose this battle that it's just fiercely defending its nest, that there are a couple of these baby wyverns behind it, and they're able to intuit this thing just wants to protect its kids. If we move away now, it's not going to pursue us. It does not care. It'll just let us go. We just need to get out of this situation now. And there's infinite possibilities of different ways that you can use story to, affect an encounter and make it interesting, and two, make it go in a way that makes it the most fun for everyone at the table.
Yep, exactly. So let's talk about some more kind of tools, right? Ways you can, and I see Bionic Shiba in chat saying it depends on how min-maxy they are. That's true, right? Some players want to live and die by the dice and nothing more than the dice. And in those cases, that's the group you're playing for. Other players are more interested in the dramatic story. And so, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. So, yeah, let's talk about some more. Let's talk about some more of the tools that one can use. So, if you're going to just decide and create an encounter for a given situation at random, odds are that there's something that you're going to need to adjust to make it fit to your current situation. And this is, of course, I'm going to assume for this situation that it's complete improvisation and that you actually have no idea. Maybe they've walked to a place that you weren't prepared for yet. Maybe they just got a lot farther in the adventure than you thought they were going to today, and you need to just throw a random encounter in to slow them down. Whatever the situation, whatever reason that you're doing it, you have absolutely nothing to go on. So you can turn to your monster manual and, for one thing, just pick something out that you want them to battle. But odds are that whatever you choose is not going to be perfect for the given situation that you're in. Maybe you have a thing that is exactly the right challenge rating not that challenge rating is by any means, or even close to, a perfect. I'm laughing at Ivalon and Shot. Never kill your players. We will, Ivalon. Maybe you're finding something that is, the perfect challenge rating, but does not fit the flavor, or the opposite situation. So, what you can do is just, with your knowledge of how the mechanics work, just give it a few features that, if you have something that's the correct challenge rating, that make it fit into your environment. So, as an example, let's say that you have, you're running an encounter in this far kind of frozen north environment, and you need something new to come up. And your players are low level, and you want to use giant spiders, but there's no way these big spiders would be running around in the Arctic. Well, you can just decide that, these are Arctic spiders. They have perhaps resistances to cold. As you describe them, you can just show the kind of white and blue coloration that makes them naturally fit into the landscape. Maybe when they do their kind of poison and venomous bite instead of the regular poison damage, the poison ends up dealing cold damage as it seeks in and kind of saps the heat from your body, and that's how they kill their prey. You can just decide all of these like little things without actually changing the monster to make it feel like it fits into the environment and like make it feel like it is right for your particular story.
Yeah, exactly. And likewise, you can have those cold spiders be vulnerable to fire if you want, or resistant to fire, depending on how difficult you need the encounter to be, right? If this is the only encounter your players are going to run into that day, you want it to be a bit of a challenge. So maybe, yes, they are immune to cold damage because they live here in the wilderness, and they're resistant to fire because they're naturally frozen. And right there, you've made that encounter way harder because any spellcaster is going to have a lot harder time dealing with it. Sorry, most spellcasters are going to have a harder time dealing with them than anything else. And that's a cool option when you're going and running things. My only encounter is this gelatinous cube, so I've given it disintegrate. Oh, Farfel, I'm not certain that's precisely the option you want to go.
I think that's the best way to go.
I did give a bunch of sharks disintegrate in our last DnDTime adventures, so I can't really talk.
Oh man, that is true. That's actually a very funny coincidence.
Let's talk about some other stuff, though.
Yeah, sorry,
Let's talk about another random encounter. Let's say goblin raiding party. You'd say that you got a bunch of goblins. These goblins are going to show up, and you're kind of worried that it's going to be boring, right? Or that just a bunch of goblins are going to mess up players. A really cool thing you can do is you can open up your player's handbook, go to the equipment section, and just look at the top couple of different types of weapons and just say, yeah, these goblins all have different weapons. This one's got a pitchfork, and this one's got a torch, and this one's got a club. And
this one's got his fists.
Yeah, this one just punches people.
That's the funniest one.
Yeah, that is pretty good. This one has, wait a minute, he's got a pie. All right, he's going to throw pies at you. You can totally roll with something like that to give your combat a lot more interest and versatility. And on top of that, right, it gives your players some fun, right? First, it's goofy. And even if there's a lot of tension to it, like, oh, it's still a brutal encounter, your players can then think, oh, well, I'm going to attack the goblin with the longsword before I attack the one wielding his fists, right? You give them some strategy to play with, too.
That encounter sounded absolutely delightful, Jeremy.
Oh, thank you.
That's all. I really wanted to. I really wish that I didn't know about it, so I could have experienced being attacked by a bunch of goblins with these dumb improvised weapons.
I mean, how did this goblin get a gun? Farfel, your goblins have guns. Sometimes
maybe there's goblins with guns in your world.
Who knows? And I mean, that's so interesting. You could do that. I don't know.
And well, I was going to say, on the other side of things, if you want to, you're worried that the goblins are just going to be too weak or boring, then you can buff that up in the other way. Maybe one of the goblins is a goblin shaman, and you've decided to give them just a few spells. They know maybe just like a simple magic missile spell and a shield spell, and now they're a much different threat than a goblin would normally be, and probably a much bigger threat than a goblin would normally be. And you can do that in a lot of ways. Maybe you can give them other class levels if you want to. If you're feeling very confident in your ability to just sort of know the basic player handbook. Maybe one of the goblins is a barbarian and just takes half damage from bludgeoning and slashing, as you can tell that he's raging. And there are endless ways you can just make small and just little tiny tweaks here and there. And I think one of the things is...
mention that.
Well, I was going to say... Go ahead.
No, please.
Let me finish my thought. I was just going to say, like, you need to... I think it can be intimidating thinking about some of these things for newer DMs because they don't have a lot of context for like how they would govern the spells. And the answer to that is simple. You can just, for one thing, if you have any spellcasters in your party, you can just be like, yeah, they'll be roughly as good as them. So it'll be the same save DC and same attack level as your players, or you can just set something arbitrary using that as a metric. So if your players have a DC 13, you're like, yeah, this goblin isn't that good. He's got like a DC 11 and his spell attack bonus is only like a +4. Or you can go the opposite way higher. You can just make these decisions very quickly.
I mean, you can open up Volo's Guide to Monsters, which not everyone has, or the Player's Handbook, go into Appendix B, I think, Appendix B, where it has all the humanoid character stat blocks. Look up
Cool.
Wizard or Archmage, and just use those spells and those save DCs, except it's a goblin, so it's got goblin hit points. Obviously, that's an extreme example because you're going from challenge rating 1/4 to 8. But you can still play along that kind of direction. It works a lot better in Volo's Guide because they have lower CR wizards like the Evoker, which I think is CR3. You can just stick the Evoker and give it the hit points and armor class of a goblin. And boom, you've got your powerful goblin kaboomer, which is, boom, fire! And that's just all they do.
God, goblin kaboomer. I think, honestly, kobold kaboomer.
That's got it's got the alliteration.
You know that kobold kaboomer is going to be something I'm going to use in my games all the time.
And one of the things you mentioned a second ago, and I want to get back to that, Pete mentioned giving monsters stats, giving them player character abilities. I'm personally not a fan of giving a Tarask 30 levels in Wizard or 20 levels in Wizard or whatever. But taking core defining features from a class and putting it on a creature, I like. So yesterday, I was, again, 2 times I have yesterday's game to reference. I had 3 level 7 players. They were fighting an Ankylosaurus. Okay, those things are challenge rating 3. They're not that scary. So, and this was an Ankylosaurus that was raging and rampaging through town. Oh, wow. So I gave it the Barbarian's Rage feature and had it attack recklessly with Reckless Attack, a Barbarian feature. Bada boom, we're done. Right, I gave it 2 Barbarian stats to make it a way more threatening encounter for them and fit the bill of the story. You know, you can decide, in the case Pete mentioned earlier with the Wyvern defending its eggs, well, that Wyvern is going to attack with everything it's got, so it's going to fight recklessly. Does it have the Reckless Attack feature on its stat block? No.
But you know what that is.
You know how that ability works, so you can just say, yeah, it's got advantage on its attacks. And you have advantage on attacking because it's doing everything it possibly can to kill you, to drive you away. And those are some cool directions to go in to make those encounters a little more nuanced, a little more interesting.
And Jeremy, you said you wouldn't want to put 20 wizard levels on a Tarask. I know very much. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, well, that is the very common, I awaken a Tarask and I give it 20 wizard levels, and this is now my big bad evil guy. It's a trope.
Is it actually a trope? I've never heard of that one before.
Yeah, that is.
Fair enough.
It's brutal. It's terrifying.
It's funny. That's...
but yeah,
Jeremy,
I mean...
a thing I wanted to do was...
Sure.
Well, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was saying, at this point, we're getting into much more nuanced stuff, right? You have to know what these classes have for their features before you can start using them, right? Before you start giving the roguish, sneaky goblin uncanny dodge, you have to know what uncanny dodge is. So we're getting a little more advanced in terms of what, how you can improv. But
especially
overall,
as a beginner DM,
this is a great method of really figuring out how things work, understanding the game, and having control in your hand. As a dungeon master, the illusion is always that you are under control. Nothing is true until you've said it. So keep that in mind and always roll with that.
It is the great mirage that is to
One
be
last quick thing. When you're dealing with monsters and damage, count up on how much damage they've dealt to a creature. Don't count down from its hit points. Way easier to do that.
Yes.
Just do it that way. It's easier. You can have your players track how much damage they've dealt. It just works so much better. So that's all.
That's a good trick. So I thought it would be fun, Jeremy, and I mentioned this to you briefly, but I thought it might be fun to practice what we preach a little bit and kind of show off that what we're saying is actually true and have people give us a couple of ideas for encounters, and we will very quickly talk about how we would change and make them more appropriate for whatever challenge rating and whatever kind of situation that they're in. So I thought it'd be fun, like almost like an improv show, as this is the improvisation episode, to have people throw us out, a monster, an environment, and a challenge rating, and we will just make whatever it is that they do work for what it is. Are you in, Jeremy? As we got
I'm absolutely in. One thing before, though, preference, you don't say Tarask level 1 characters open plane, because when there's nothing to work with, there's nothing to work with. All right.
Yeah, agreed. And we'll pick from different people, and also what was the other thing I wanted to say? I don't remember, so it probably wasn't overly important. So yeah, if you got any ideas, go ahead and just go ahead and throw them out in chat right now, preferably using monsters that we would know.
Ooh, how Tangerine Parasol. How about 50 level 1 characters versus the Tarask? That's actually a cool one.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that exact thing.
There's a really interesting this is totally unrelated. So if other guys have if other people in the chat have more scenarios they want to throw at us, please keep sending them. But I'm gonna go off on a teeny bit of a tangent with this one because I love it. In D&D, in 5th edition D&D, there's a weird disconnect where 50 archers, just peasants with archers, or maybe not 50, 200 archers, will kill an ancient red dragon before the ancient red dragon gets to go. It'll just die because they'll crit, and then that damage will kill the ancient red dragon. Yep. Statistically, they'll just win. And maybe that makes some sense as to why cities still exist. But at the same time, if it's 200 dudes could kill it, any decent sized city would rally up 200 people to go kill the dragon.
Yeah, and the way a lot of the monsters get around that is by the immunity to non-magical damage. So it would be unless they all are wielding magical bows, it wouldn't hit certain things like the Tarask. But I think dragons dragons
are not resistant or immune to non-magical, which is why I brought it up specifically. I see Game Master's Vault's mentioning, according to Cold Fight Club, it would take 729 level 1 characters to fight a Tarask at hard level. That's an interesting point. But if they were all wizards and they all cast magic, well, no, magic missile does nothing.
Magic missile doesn't.
Well, it's interesting because I think the best thing because Tarask's immune to non-magical damage, the best option that those level 1 characters have is light torches and throw torches because they do 1 point of fire damage when lit. You see, she was saying Dragon gets surprise attack and use breath weapon, rip the whole army. That's true, but that's only a certain size. The army doesn't perfectly squish into a cone. A lot of people are going to die, don't get me wrong. But if the dragon's really that threatening, it's just a funky disconnect with how certain things work. And I think the ancient dragons are obviously the most extreme example. But some giants, dude, those giants can only target 1 creature a turn throwing a boulder, or maybe 3 swinging a club. If you outnumber the giants 20-1, you're gonna kill all the giants. A Game Master's Vault says all monsters can be deadly if they're played the right way by the GM. That is absolutely true. I mean, just like we just said in all these examples, ways that you can make encounters easier to your situation, you can make things harder the same exact way. If you describe a lava pit and your ancient lava dragon is resting over it, dude, give the ancient lava dragon the ability to conjure pillars of lava to attack your ally, to attack the players if they're trashing it too hard. Just come up with an ability on the fly, give it a layer action on the fly. I do that all the time. Sorry, guys. I have stuff I didn't think of even, at all until it happened. And you'll see that if you watch Delves. Delves. Watch DnDTime Behind the Screen on Saturday. It's not this Saturday, the next Saturday, where we build encounters. And then watch Delves the next day. And you'll see immediately things that I do differently than we may have planned. Because on the fly...
Because the situation demands it.
Yeah, exactly. Tying way back around the story, the last thing you want is that dramatic conclusion to fall flat. So don't be afraid to juice up your enemies on the fly, give them the maximum hit points their kind of creature can have. Don't be afraid to do that if you need to do that, because you want that finale to be the dramatic finale. You don't want it to just be a stomp, because that
feels bad.
Just a bummer.
And on the opposite side of things of that, because what Game Masters was talking about, where all monsters can be deadly, one of my own personal favorite examples of that was a time I ran a homunculus, which is a CR0 monster inside of a lab. And what it did was used traps in its environment to almost TPK a party. It was an extremely close battle, and the creature has no attacks. But he was kind of flying around up in the rafters. He had the fly speed, so we used that a lot. He was jumping around in the rafters and kind of taking cover up above, and using just things like the environment, setting fire to kind of, knocked over lanterns in the room to light the players' clothes on fire and things like that, leading them into a room where he knew there were a lot of rats that were very ravenous, and that's just a whole nother way. And that's obviously taken to the extreme of kind of giving a creature things outside of its kit, by just kind of, moving the environment and shaping it to whatever kind of the whims were of what I wanted this creature to be able to do in the moment. But you can really stretch the CR of things by the way that you just kind of, rule how they interact with their world around them.
Yeah, and I love this comment in chat by Bionic Shiba. You thought this was my final form?
Oh yeah, that's the classic.
Right.
That's such a good tool.
So especially if you have cultists. Oh yeah, the cultist died and is immediately resurrected as this incarnation, the shadow demon brought back by their demon lord that they serve, or something, right? That is just such a cool way to work things in. But yeah, I love that. I see The Forgotten One has given us a scenario. A very peculiar scenario. A level 20 evil Air Gensai wizard/rogue, 13 and 7, who has a lot of disposable portable holes/bags of holding, versus a 3-man player team of equal level on a rooftop tower 25-foot radius and a thunderstorm brewing.
It's done. You've already done it.
What? I'm so confused. I don't know. One of the players is a hero and runs up and just throws one of the portable holes into one of the bags of holding, and everything blows up and they die. I don't know. That was a very, very bizarre scenario.
A very specific. There's a very specific scenario, and I think that scenario is already wild enough that it does not need to be adjusted in any way, because there are a lot of very clear issues here that can resolve the encounter instantly, specifically by utilizing the old portable hole bag of holding. For anyone unaware, if you put a bag of holding in a portable hole, or vice versa, canonically, it opens up a portal to the astral plane and sucks everything in the. Yeah, I was gonna say, and sucks everything around it into said portal, which is cataclysmic for most characters, unless they're very high level.
Yeah,
but really, it's just a funny storytelling tool.
Exactly, and honestly, in that case, The Forgotten One, it sounds like, I hope, that is the dramatic conclusion.
Yeah.
So, in that case, you're not going to, hopefully, not trying to make it much easier, right? You want that to be the dramatic battle, especially once you get to super high levels. The game does become a little wonky. Things start to break down a little bit. But I don't know, how giant thunderbolts crash down from the heavens. Maybe the god of one of the characters is Thor and throws down thunderbolts to assist them or something, right? You can roll with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I guess to give a legitimate answer to the question. But yeah, we're about at time here.
Indeed we are.
So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, stopping by. I really hope that this was helpful for you all. I know it's always helpful for me. Going over these kind of, I think, basics here, but I don't mean basics. Going over these fundamentals, these tools in your Dungeon Master toolkit. for me is super helpful. It really helps to get my creative juices flowing and excite me. And I know, Pete, you feel the same way.
I do. And again, I'm sorry I was not as talkative as normal tonight.
It's okay. I was more than talkative enough.
No, it was good. I appreciate you covering for me, Jeremy. I'm a bit voiced out. I gotta really kind of preserve myself for Friday's upcoming Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time, which, for anyone unaware, Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time is a show that we run every Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we run 3 unrelated one-shots starring the viewers and the members of chat and the people who just hang out here on Twitch. And it's always a lot of fun. Each one's an hour. It's a very low commitment game. You can sign up, and there's all the information about how to do that underneath the channel here in the various descriptions. Come hang out on Friday. It's always a good time.
It's the best time. There's no better time ever.
A flannel pug, you're always so sleepy.
Flannel pug. What's important here is that you got a good rest. I'm really glad that Pete and I's babbling is beautiful ASMR for you. That's all that matters. That's what we're going for here. We're an ASMR channel. Hello,
I've been thinking about switching over
to my
to this
channel, and now we're going to have a great time, just kind of talking. Just lay back, relax, and that's how it works.
I have a dice bag here. I'm going to go ahead and just take one dice out of that bag.
Oh, Flynn, put your spell slots are recovered. It was a short rest.
That's great.
Beautiful. Anywho, thank you all for stopping by. Don't forget to tune in Friday and to sign up if you're new and you want to play. Thank you in particular today. I mean, thank you to everyone who's hung out, but thank you to Heitzel. I hope that's correct. My apologies for your lovely 25-bit donation. We appreciate that immensely. Thank you for the Forgotten One for resubscribing again. This is actually your 3rd month in a row. Bada boom. Thank you, Maddie Morgs, for the host. Thank you, Bionic Shiba, for your little bit donation at the beginning. Much appreciated. And thank you. I know you might not be here at the moment, but thank you, One Crit Wonder TV, for following. That was 4 hours ago, ahead of the game. Way to go. And of course, we hope to see you all for Friday's game of Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time. It should be great. I'll be honest, I'm going to put this one out there. Guys, I'm going to move my microphone up to my face. Guys, great.
Now you're doing ASMR, Jesus.
I have an adventure that I have been running for a long time, and I'm actually running this Friday.
Oh God, I can't handle this, Jeremy.
Pretty. Sit back, relax, great time. And I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Pete. Jesus Christ. And this is DnDTime Talks. Oh
Good
God,
night.
that was horrible.